Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. And today I am joined by director Perry Blackshear to speak about his new film, When I Consumed You. So I saw this film for the 2021 Fantasia International Film Festival, and it was like I have to speak to the director because this is a very interesting concept. I think for what I believe is a exploration of trauma and other things. I found it very interesting and it's scary but unsettling. So, but before we begin and get into the film, I'm gonna just ask Perry to introduce himself, and then we'll get into it. So, Perry.
Yes, hi, my name's Perry Blackshear, and I'm the director of When I Consume You. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, my first question is the concept of using a demon. To what for I think this is one of those films where a lot of it is left up to interpretation, but I saw the demon as representative of things like of trauma, of anxiety, depression, like deep depression, I believe, and things that children experience like from their childhood. So like focused around two siblings, Daphne, played by Libby Ewing, and Wilson, played by Evan Dumushal.
Yeah, wow, you'll be so happy that you got that right the first time. That's that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and so, but the way how it is like it starts off with Daphne unfortunately dying. But again, this is one of those things, those situations where if the way she dies, you're not sure if what we're being told through narrative is the way she actually dies. So I think that's an interesting way, and I'm going to start a discussion about the film that way because I want to talk about how I think this film is I'm calling it an interpretive film because like we're never really given a definitive answer about anything.
Yeah, so I think we definitely wanted there to be one movie sort of and in this movie it's a story about a brother and a sister fighting a demon that has been after them since childhood. And that should be a fully formed, functional movie that functions, in its own way. And then definitely underneath that, like some of my favorite films, like It Follows and The Babadook, and a lot of the work of Mike Flanagan. There's definitely a very strong, uh, thing underneath that about. Someone called it the wolf at the door in another interview. That everybody has a different wolf at the door that always shows up, sort of knocking on their windows, knocking at their door when they're feeling down, ready to kick them when they're low. And I think it could be anything from childhood trauma to just that voice in your head that tells you you're terrible and you'll never be good enough and that no one will ever like you. So I definitely, I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out because the cast and crew and I all really cared about the subject matter, and so we tried to make sure that we were doing the movie as the movie was supposed to do, but underneath that is a whole sort of complex story about these two siblings getting over, being haunted by their past, basically.
Yeah, and I think what when it comes to discussions of trauma, especially we're going to talk about familiar trauma and then siblings, is people expect if you're experiencing something together that people would have the same emotional reaction or they'll process it the same way, especially if they're siblings. And I thought it was really good that we got to see them processing their trauma and not only their childhood trauma, but I think things that they went through as adults up until the beginning of the film very differently. Like for Wilson, I think he internalized a lot of, I would say, not only his trauma but his anxieties and his depression, and that kind of stopped him from being able to function in society because we saw that he was trying to get a job and he wasn't able to do that. But then it was also hinted that he never really completed high school. Whereas for Daphne, she still functions in real life. She had friendships, she had relationships, but at home she's kind of like she's stuck at home. When she's at home, she doesn't seem to function, and the only person she connects with is with David. So I thought it was interesting to have that kind of like flip side for I think you what's the word I'm looking for is how people process emotions. I thought it was really interesting to get those two flip sides of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's great that you're. It's wonderful when you put things in a movie and people pick up on all the things you care about in there. So I think none of us are experts. Certainly, I think that we did do a lot of research and a lot of book learning, and then we also just drew from it experiences of people that I've loved and the cast have loved in their life that have gone through stuff. And there was one thing I read that's a little depressing that says, well, personality is just a coping mechanism, which I thought gave me a lot to think about. And I don't, this is sort of crazy to think about, but I definitely think that what the people that we've known in our life, when these things happen, they definitely have different coping mechanisms to face what they're going through and to kind of manage it all. And I think for Daphne, her answer was, if someone hits you, hit them back 3 times as hard and don't stop hitting them. And for Wilson, it's, if someone hits you, just be as small as possible and as quiet as possible and hope they go away. And that has worked for them, but now that they become adults, causes all sorts of other things. So yes, that was definitely a thread we cared about in the film. And that sort of dyad, the push and pull between the two of them, and how both of them are sometimes right and sometimes wrong in the way that they face things. Although I will say that Daphne is mostly right most of the time.
No, I think she's right, because like I myself, I was diagnosed with depression in 2017, and then I was diagnosed with seasonal anxiety depression in 2019. And that's the main depression comes because as a result of MS. I have MS, so that's kind of like one of the psychological effects of that. But I kind of related to Daphne a bit because I was bullied in secondary school, or as like North Americans would call it, high school. And
Oh,
I had to learn to fight and defend myself and learn to speak up for myself. And Daphne is kind of like now, she's encouraging Wilson to be the same, because like the thing is, people, especially when it comes to like bullies, whether you're in school, because I think a lot of people forget that bullies exist everywhere. Bullying doesn't only happen at school, it happens in life. And like there's
mhm,
things that can beat you down, whether it's circumstance or another individual, or even just like your own mental health.
mhm.
And I think Daphne is like her motivation, even as a spirit, throughout to the end of the film, is to inspire Wilson to like get up and eventually start fighting, because there comes a point when you're bullied where you're saying, you know what, enough is enough. If I get
Yeah,
punished, so be it. I'll take my licks another day. But right now we're gonna have to fight. And I
yeah,
I saw her character as kind of like that. She's like, I'm gonna have to fight for myself and fight for my brother, because I think that's kind of like what. And I'm we're gonna get into this, but I saw her coming back as her willing as her goal to defend Wilson, and she was like, I can't leave this realm until I know my brother can defend himself.
yeah, yep. And that's just right. And that was something that the actress and I talked a lot about. Um, and I think when she read the script, she called me and she was like, I'm in for many reasons, but one of them is it's just about a story about the sister defending her brother no matter what. And she's like, and I do that in my life anyway because she has a brother. So she was like, I'm so excited. Um, yes, and I think there is that sort of awful thing where like you want them to change, but in changing them, sometimes that's also its own thing. So it's sort of like, what do you gain? What do you lose from toughening up? In this way. Because I will say that for the first half of the movie, I myself sort of wanted to shake Wilson and be like, bro, like get it together. Like, I love you, but like get it together, And so, um, and he does, but then, that he loses something along the way. So I think that's many of the actors and I myself, I think have gone through these waves where something beats you down, you sort of become vicious in response, whether it's an employer, or whatever it is. And then you sort of get in this mode where you can't stop fighting. And you need, I've needed my friends to kind of be like, whoa, it's okay now. You're safe now. It's fine. We can relax for like a little while. So yeah, I mean, it's fun. These are really good questions, and it's good to talk about this stuff because I feel like, yeah, not many interviewers or reviewers have talked about them, so it's exciting for
Yeah, no,
me.
I picked up like you were talking about how like you like, but sometimes when you start, I think when you learn to fight early, like when you eventually reach the point where you fight back, you kind in the West Indies we call this thing called you taking it for your rage. And what that means is like for me, I can't stand bullies. I hate to see
Uh huh.
anything being unfair, and I got to the point where like it was hard for me to, once I saw something happening I didn't like, I would speak up. And then it
Yeah.
happens over and over, and you're just like, people be like, "You're always angry." I'm like, "I'm not." Kind of like the Hulk, Hulk is like, "How do you manage it?" Like, I'm always angry. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
like, you're always ready to step in and defend because it's like this defense mechanism that you have, and it's almost always activated. But but then you're just like this thing that you have to like tone down, and then you don't realize it till someone does point out and say, take a deep breath. You don't
Yeah.
always have to defend everyone. You don't always have to get into every situation. And I think kind of like with Daphne, that's the same thing with Wilson. But I think the thing with Wilson is that she knew that if she didn't step in, that he would destroy himself. And
Yep.
I think the beauty I think with the relationship that happens in the film is that you mentioned that he does lose himself, and that's one of the things I want to get into is because I think when it comes to like things, especially like with mental illness, when I think what a lot of people don't realize is people who do suffer from mental illness, and not only just depression or anything, but just like anxiety, or if they're always in a situation where they feel they can't win, eventually you stop. And Wilson was just, I think, at that point in the film
Yeah.
where he was at the point where he would have just like given up completely, and that's when Daphne comes back. But then she comes back in a very interesting way. So I want to ask you a bit about building up the tension. Because no joke, I was doing stuff on the computer and on my phone when I was watching this because
Uh,
I was like trying to send emails and stuff for the festival. And my phone started to glitch. I was receiving emails from myself that I did not send. I'm like, I did not send this. I did not send this file. Why is this file turning up in my emails? And it happened at the same scenes, where he's sending the messages and her hand
uh-huh.
on the phone, and I legit tweeted to my friend. I messaged my friends. I'm like, "Yo, dude, this movie has me weirded out because my phone is acting up. What is going on?" So
That's awesome.
it was like it happened. It was like so coincidental, but it had me like legit freaked out. So, but I want to ask you about those scenes in particular, just like building that tension because I think that was a great transition from I think the emotional aspect of the film at the beginning to becoming this more sinister tone for the rest of the film.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that happened as because we actually shot the movie before the pandemic, and then
Mm,
we were editing over the pandemic, and I think that it was important to us in a dark story like this to keep a little bit of surprise and playfulness and sort of. And I remember showing it to one friend, and he was like, "Oh my god, thank God Daphne came back!" Like this is going to be rough watching this poor dude struggle through everything. So I think as soon as that hand came in, I got to be the sort of. It's fun as a director. It's like you take some things away sometimes, but then you get to give gifts. You're like, hey, look at this! Isn't this fun? And that was a moment when we were all seeing it, filming it. We were all just like, yay! Like this is fun. It's like we're getting to give these fun things back. And someone was like, "Is it supposed to be a little silly?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's like playful. It's like it doesn't make it's fun that there's something else going on now. And I think that it's exciting when you get to sometimes, especially in the editing process, you're slogging through and that sort of wind up
mm,
thing, and then you get to then the thing opens. Like that's really fun. So that was a fun sequence there. But I also didn't, one of the things about the film that we cared about, I guess this is maybe a tangent, is we didn't want to let people off the hook too easily, or and by people I mean not have it be a movie where like, oh, I'm sad, I'm now rescue, or like, oh, defeating the monster, yay, everybody's happy forever. Like it's there's a the characters have to really go through some stuff in the movie, and I wanted to bring the audience along with them in that journey.
yeah, no, that those scenes were legitimately creepy for me because
Awesome.
my phone was acting up. I'm like, this is creepy.
The movie definitely did that. It was definitely radiating out of the computer.
Yeah, but then it got even creepier because then we finally get to the whole aspect of the demon, this demonic presence, the stalker, because it wasn't something that was mentioned before, and it just like, and I think is really interesting that it was something that wasn't hinted at before, and it was only something that really rose intentionally, I'm using a pun, rose up from the depths of the story, where it seemed like Daphne had been stalked by this presence for all these years, but Wilson never had a clue. It seemed like this was something once more again that she was protecting him from this entity, this being that she believed was stalking him from since childhood. And then it starts out because like a typical in like a typical but atypical horror story where is like this presence in a closet, and you're just getting this outline of a body and then these glowing yellow eyes. And I was like, I don't play with this. I'm from the West Indies. We don't play with demons. We don't do this. I was like, yo, what is going on? But then as the story went on, I started to think, okay, maybe the demon isn't like an actual demonic presence. It's
Hmm.
like it's as I said at the beginning, anxiety, depression, the trauma they suffered as childhood. And this and I love that you used a physical representation of these things that occur to us mentally and things that people don't get to see, because like when we talked about Daphne, she functions so well in society that no one would really know what she's going through at home. And
Hmm.
then because anything that to me, my sister's fighting with the dog.
I was actually in an interview, and my girlfriend and her dog were just like, "Hi," and in the interview, in the like transcription, she's like, "After Perry was interrupted by a dog, we continued with the interview." So I feel like Zoom has made everything very fine. It's just all of in the middle of our lives now.
It is
Yeah,
what it is. For
exactly.
sure. But I think it's interesting that Wilson is now, after the passing his sister, knows about this present. And the reason it happens is because he's become obsessed with finding out her death, because he thinks that what the coroner says is the reason for her death isn't really it. He's like, there's something that killed her.
Hmm.
And you kind of have to believe him, because there's nothing that was hinted at specifically that they said in the film she died of drug overdose. But I'm trying to remember, I didn't see any like what you would call drug paraphernalia around her. What we did see
Right.
was a blow dryer that was running as though she was blow drying her hair, and then she just like maybe got had a I was like, did she have a heart attack, did she have a stroke?
Hmm.
And I was wondering, and then as I was thinking about the film, preparing for this, I was thinking, like, was that the moment where her body just gave up and she was like, I can't do this anymore? And like the demon called David Castillo, he's an interesting one. That was when she finally gave into it. So like, I call him interesting because he made me think of Constantine. I'm like, is he supposed to be an homage to Constantine with the tan trench coat, the shirt, the tie, everything? But then this character David, this is a literal representation of the demon. But he's interesting is how you guys introduce him, where he's Wilson is at this point where he's following these men, and
Hmm.
he's following this group of men, and he believes one of them is the demon. And I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you because I don't know, maybe I saw something different, because these group of men, I saw the one he picked out was the smallest one, and I
Uh-huh.
was thinking, is he going after the easiest target because he knows in his mind he's not as mentally and physically strong as he is, so he's going to go for the smallest, or who he deems as the weakest member of the pack.
Yeah, I mean that it was a little bit like we wanted to make the that character distinct in the group. I think it was more the smallest of the pack. There's a little bit of music. Is that part of your podcast, or
I think that's you.
that's me?
I'm not hearing anything.
Oh my gosh! There's another ghost in the machine. Uh,
There's a ghost in the shell.
there's a ghost in the shell. There's a ghost in the machine. Okay, that was crazy. Maybe
No, I
it's
don't have
from the
anything
beyond.
else.
It was funny because it was creepy, like Stranger Things music too, and I was like, well, "What's happening? Is this part of the?" Anyway,
What are you playing?
um, no, I mean, I think the point with that is that it was sort of like the a little bit of a misdirect where you're kind of going deeper and deeper into the thing, and you think the bad guy's there, and the bad guy sort of taps you on the shoulder, and it sort of sends you off into some other direction. And you're the second person that mentioned Constantine, which I actually haven't seen, but now or read, or because I know it's a lot of different things, right? So now I actually really want to engage with that. I think that a lot of it stemmed from wanting to give McLeod Andrews, who's a good friend of mine and was been in the first two movies, a real fireball of a character to sort of come through and just. He described it as like yanking the film by the shirt and sort of dragging it in some other direction. And I think that was a blast. We did a lot of improv. I mean, the whole thing was a blast.
But yeah, no, I think his character is really good because the thing with Wilson is I saw him as evolving into what he sees as a heroic presence. Like you can tell, like he's a kid of the 80s and a kid in the 90s, so he grew up watching like a lot of like action films, and that's how I was interpreting it. And he's like doing his own training montage. He's like, I'm gonna be the hero, and like I
Yeah.
can hear the 80s synth music playing, and he's just like, I'm gonna hype myself up, I'm doing all of this. I have my sister like egging me on, but then it was like, to me, it kind of seemed like he was starting to just get so involved in this, like he was actually beginning to unravel more mentally the more he went into it, because
Yep.
he started to speak, and I'm like, he's speaking like an 80s action hero,
Yep.
and he's not speaking like a regular person. He's speaking like he's reading from the scripts. And I wanted to ask you about his dialogue, how his dialogue changed once we reached this part of the film, because the David that was the Wilson that was speaking isn't the Wilson that was speaking before.
Yeah, I think that's extremely astute. We definitely wanted to make, you know, you talk about personalities being a defense mechanism or whatever, or a coping mechanism. I think that the hero thing is just right, and I think he did sort of see himself in this kind of like, oh, I'm gonna go, it's up to me, like I have to fight the evil and this kind of thing. And I think that you I don't know. I have felt moments and sort of times like that in my life where it's like, oh, be the hero, because you watch all these movies and you watch all these things and you have to be the hero. But there's something very selfish about that in some ways, because it's all about you and your journey. And the world exists as antagonists or helpers or this other thing. Um, and I think that he does sort of lose himself in becoming this persona that he developed. And I think what I liked the way, especially Evan played it, is in that conversation with the detective when he's acting like this one kind of guy, and then he starts saying like, "Yeah, she's still here and she talks to me," and she starts to kind of like, "Holy shit, what am I doing?" Like break down for a second, and we see the old Wilson for a second. That's like, oh my, and then of course the whole, it's a lie, and then the whole thing gets ramped back up. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Evan did a fantastic job in that scene in particular, because what he does is that you said he goes back to Wilson for just a minute, but then that switch, it was almost as if he took on the personality of David. And he took on that personality from just those few minutes of interaction that they were having. So I thought it was a really great transition, I think, in his performance, and how he began to like behave, like how McLeod was playing David. Because
Uh-huh.
me, I see Wilson as one of these people who are what you would call like chameleons, where whoever they're around is who influences their behavior. There's some people that when they're around someone that hears, they start speaking an accent, or they take on like their mannerisms because they don't have their own personality. So he kind of like takes on whoever he's around. And he did that because, to me, because with his sister gone, the only person he's interacting with is David. So he like took on this personality. And that's what I think really set in the point where he just began to really accept this entity, because he was like, to defeat the evil, you must become the evil. And he
Yeah.
did it in that moment.
Yeah, that scene was really great. I mean, it was very late at night, but I think we all thought, what would be a really good antagonist for Wilson? Like, what would be someone that he would hate, but also kind of relate to, and almost kind of want to be like? You have this detective, very masculine, authoritative, powerful, domineering, demanding, and there was a sort of gravitational pull towards that masculinity and sort of d- dominance that I think that you're picking up on. And I think McLeod, when he played after the detective becomes who he really is, we did a few different choices, and one of the ones McLeod did was he was very fatherly, and it's like, hey, it's okay. I'm going to eat your sister now, but it's all okay. And that scared the hell out of all of us. There's something very upsetting about that fatherly, like, you are helpless, I'm taking care of this thing. And I think that's also baked into what would be the ultimate thing for Wilson to face in at this moment.
Yeah. The thing with him consuming Daphne was that I think that kind of like touched back onto what I was saying earlier, where that was where she gave up, she gave in to him, so he consumed her. And there's this very interesting scene where Wilson, he reaches in to David to pull her back out.
Yeah.
And that to him would have seemed like an extremely brave moment. I was like, this is an extremely stupid moment because this is demon. You like we reaching your hand. Like my mama say, you don't have conversations with demons, and he having a full on conversation and reaching into demon, pulling out. He doesn't know what he's gonna pull out, but then what he does pull out is like he pulls out this super dark side of him where I'm like, is this cannibalism? Because what was he eating? I need to know.
What was McLeod eating when?
There's a scene where he's basically doing the has like the symbol on the walls and he's
Oh
doing
yeah.
acts like he's in a Jean-Claude Van Damme scene, like meditating in front of
Yeah.
shrine. And like there's meat. I'm like, this better be chicken. Like, what is this
It was actually chicken. We were
meat?
experimenting with a bunch of stuff, and we were like, "God, this looks gross."
It looked gross, but what was it? What was it actually supposed to be? Was it like I mean, what was the character Wilson was supposed to be eating? Like I'm like, did he go full cannibalism because he was like,
No, in my mind, it was sort of a dead rat or a piece of meat or or something like some you have to like take life to get life, this sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
thing. And I think that um, we looked up a lot of Gnostic rituals and a lot of sort of esoteric stuff, and I didn't want to be too. I don't know. I think one thing that I both love and sometimes don't love in movies is when they're like, back in Sumeria, there was a this specific, and then there's like the expert guy and he tells you all about Sumeria. And I love Sumerian shit, but we wanted it to sort of like the point was about this brother trying to get his sister back,
yeah,
and this idea of going dark, like becoming really. In some ways, what I cared the most about is like to fight shitty people. Sometimes you feel like you have to be a really shitty person,
yeah.
and back to like fight it.
Yeah.
And I think I think it does work sometimes, but also you do lose something in the process,
Yeah.
at least momentarily, and I think that's all of that is what I cared about there. So no, there was, but I loved Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, he did look pretty badass, I'll say that.
Yeah, he had like the band around his arm. I'm like, all he
Yeah.
was missing was this like the bandana around his head. He
Yeah,
was like,
have a bandana or shave his head. That mark, by the way, was my room. We filmed in was his apartment, was my room. So that scary mark was on the wall for months afterwards because I couldn't. I tried to erase it, and it was like fake blood. And everyone that came to visit me was like, "The fuck is on your wall?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. It's really scaring me. I wish I could get rid of it."
why did you just
Uh,
paint it over?
I eventually painted it over. It took me too long. I think it must have been the dark mark telling me to keep itself there that
No,
kept me from doing it. Yeah.
I would have been like, get some olive oil, some holy water, and splash on the wall. Like,
Our actress Libby was like, "I gotta smudge this," and she like saged the whole area.
cleanse
So
the area.
yeah, cleanse the area. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so before we wrap up, so like the one thing the last thing I want to talk about is the sound design because I really found it is very atmospheric and like it kind of like immerses you, especially in I think in Wilson's headspace because a lot of it is like there's these swishing sounds that are like heartbeats, and then there's like feedback. There's like there's sense of like feedback or reverb, and then there's this I kind of like wrote it and I was like the start of howling sound that sounds like a reverb with a bit of a Gregorian or Latin Gothic chant. So I wanted to ask you about this the sound design and the music that was used in the film.
Yeah, I think so. I gave myself a challenge early on because they look like people has almost no music,
Mm.
and I think sometimes music is used. It's the most powerful, but also can sort of mess with scenes. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make a movie with no traditional music, and I tried that, and I tried to bring whatever the interior life of the characters was into our ears. So if that scene where after she died and you're all in these crazy close-ups, I wanted us to feel that sort of dissociation and overwhelm through the sonic, what I did with the soundtrack. And then once I did that, we were like, okay, this is good, but we still need some music. So we brought in Mitch Bain to do some of the scoring, and he was unbelievable. But I think the intention was to mirror the feeling of being the characters and what that would feel like, whether that's a sort of the blood rushing to your ears or the ears ringing or something like that, to sort of make us feel what they were feeling in the moment.
Yeah, no, it was really immersive, especially in the scenes where I think it really came through in this there was this transition scene with David and then there's Daphne and you're just like wondering is she gonna be who she was before? Because I'm like, does her being consumed by him change her spirit and changed who she was as a person, or what's left of her as a person. So I just thought it was like really interesting. But I know you have to go, but I wish we could talk
Yeah.
longer. There's so
Yeah,
much.
this was a great conversation. It felt really cool to hear someone talk about, you put these things that you care about sort of deep in a movie somewhere, and I felt like you brought them all up. So it was really great. A great conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good
You
evening.
too. Thanks so much.